So, my name is Rebecca Cates. I'm the urban ag educator with Purdue Extension in Lake County, and I'm here to assist Kevin Allison, who is the urban ag specialist with Marion County Soil and Water Conservation District, and he's going to be talking about this Indiana mulching tool for small farms and gardens. So, take it away, Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Becca, and thanks everybody for joining. Again, my name is Kevin Allison, Marion County's Soil and Water Conservation District. This work is supported by the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, and they are an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender. So today, we're going to be talking about the Indiana Mulching Tool, which is a new tool kind of designed for small farms and gardens, but quickly realizing that it could also be great for landscaping and fruit trees and all the things. So just kind of an overall kind of mulching planner in a sense, to know about quantities and types and things like that. So before, I also want to thank, again, Becca at Purdue Extension, Lake County SWCD, and Urban Soil Health for also help setting this up and getting the word out there. So I'm going to take you on a quick um, slideshow of some mulch. And then we're going to take a look at one of the new technical references that was created to kind of support like mulching. And then we'll look at the tool. We'll do those first couple parts pretty briefly, but if you have any questions, like let me know. So why mulch? There's tons of different kinds of mulch. In general, when I'm talking about mulch, it's like a plant material, like an organic material applied to the soil surface. So the soil surface, and we're just putting material on top. We're mulching up. In general, like through an agency standpoint, like I work for a soil and water conservation district. We work like really tightly with the USDA. They actually have like technical definitions for mulch, and they are referring to what I just said, which is basically organic material that's put on top of the soil surface. So if it's being tilled into the soil surface like compost, not necessarily mulch. So we're going to be kind of focused on just like that mulching up that top layer. But we're also going to be talking a lot about compost as a mulch, so using compost as that top surface layer. Um, it mulching is one of those practices that help us get to our soil health principles, help keep the soil covered during the growing season. Like one of my goals in my own garden, I kind of learned this from well, just soil health principles, but other farmers too that are trying to like keep their soil covered at like all times, like throughout the season. When they keep it covered, the soil is just protected. It's got the microbes have organic matter to feed on, so there's a food source, and there's not as much evapotranspir, like there's not as much evaporation and moisture loss, so we can hold moisture for longer periods of time. So there's a lot of benefits, a lot of benefits to mulch for sure. And I also think that just like keeping the soil mellow, like on our hard clays here in Indiana, like if it gets hot, one, they get dry, but also they just get hard, and then it gets harder to plant a fall crop into without like tillage, or it gets harder to plant a cover crop into the soil in the fall if the soil is too hard. So keeping it mulched year round, keeping some kind of soil cover, whether it be crop canopy, cover crops, or mulch. It's a good idea to keep it protected. Start thinking about like what kind of biomass do you have available nearby or accessible. So are you going to buy it? Are you going to get like a service where like, or are you going to contact like Chip Drop or something, or lawn care services that can like drop off wood chips? Are you going to go like collect leaves? Et cetera, et cetera. You're going to buy them in. So really thinking through like that feedstock and the mulch beforehand in terms of like quantity and where you be able to get it, I think is pretty important. Um, and then I'm going to get to a picture that shows kind of like half like soil that's half mulched and half not. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like on the left, like that strip of spinach has got a little mulch on it, and on the right, it doesn't. So which soil is going to have maybe better soil health at the end of the day after a long hot day? Which soil is going to retain more moisture for that spinach? So usually I would tend to think the one under the mulch. That there's some straw like material in the middle of these rows. That's actually dead oats. So that oats cover crop was planted the fall before this picture was taken. It died. It got raked to the middle of the pathways, and then compost was applied to the growing beds. So you've got two growing beds here with compost just applied as mulch with the oats in the middle. We'll talk a little bit about temperature when we get to that reference document, but um, a grower might do this because that tan mulch would actually cool the soil. Where in spring, we're looking to kind of raise temperatures to get better and quicker germination of vegetable crops. So one consideration might be to use a darker colored mulch in the springtime, like compost or really broken down shredded leaves, to get more of a dark and warmer soil than the tan mulch might give you. On the very far left, again, that's going back to the cover crop thing. That grass growing on the left is actually cereal rye. So that was a big grass that was planted the year before, and it will continue to grow into spring as it is here. But in these two beds with the onions and the garlic, those were winter killed cover crops that had already died. So then they was just mulched up. So we had some mulch produced by the oats, but they started decomposing. We may rake them off to get the crop planted, and then mulched up just to keep the soil protected. So on the left, you can see more like a bulkier shredded leaves that I'm using for onions. I didn't need quite as fine as compost for like a seeding on top of the soil. So the chunkier stuff did okay in this situation. And then for the garlic on the right, I use straw. So there's lots of different ways of mulching up. Some people love to use the leaf compost and compost on garlic as well. And they might, like some of the growers do that because they might not really want to deal with all that straw residue after the garlic's been harvested. Maybe it's just such a big area that they just know that they're gonna need to rake off that straw to get like beets planted afterwards. So just thinking and being cognizant of the labor. I just saw a question. Can you plant a cover crop in the garden patch that will die in the winter and provide mulch? Yes. That's a great question, Gail. And I do that. Sometimes I like just to keep my paths not cover crop just because it makes it easier to like get through and weed um, beds and things. But yeah, in the fall, like I usually do take the opportunity and do it because I'm like, and I usually do the same cover crop that I'm doing the adjacent bed. But yeah, because you're right, like especially if you're like tarping it in the spring or something, like you might as well um, do the do the walkway as well to gain some mulch. So yes, good question. Um, all right, next picture, you should be seeing kale. And of course, like you don't just have to use like one kind of mulch at once. Like this kale is being planted into like crimson clover cover crop that's been chopped down and killed. And then there was newspaper put on top of that and then straw put on top of that. So this is like triple mulch in a sense. And there wasn't like in this particular bed, there wasn't like almost any weeds to pick the entire season because that had really sealed the deal on weed suppression early on. Um, the next picture you should see is just kind of actually that's Frith Farm in Maine. I just wanted to add this picture because you can see just various kinds of mulches. Like he's got wood chips in the pathways and kind of on the right side around like some of his perennial like hedgerows. I think he's growing like herbs and different kinds of like shrubs in some of the beds, and he uses a lot of wood chips there using like compost and bark fines. They have access to bark fines there. Again, like we might not. They've got a big like lumber industry that produces that. It's like, what's available here? In Indiana, I see lots of leaves, right? And wood chips and things. So those are kind of the resources that we can get at. He's like the most important part about my farm is seamless coverage and careful raking. Like he really did like really stress to his crew and himself to just like make sure that mulch even between like the walkway and the bed is like seamless. So there's not a lot of like weeds coming up on that edge where they usually do. So just like careful raking, smoothing out mulch, just making sure everything's kind of not just aesthetically good but organized, just so you can kind of have more flow. So he's putting on like let's say like an inch or 2 inches of really fine compost. I think he screens it first in some situations, especially if he's seeding it like these spinach. But like if you are planting the crop or seed like into compost that's sitting on top of soil, but the roots aren't exactly in the soil, just know that that compost or leaf mulch is going to dry out a lot faster. So that it's just gonna, yeah, it'll dry out fast. And so if you are like planting into compost above the soil, then you would probably want to make sure you have irrigation ready or watering to make sure that's getting watered. If you're transplanting into a bed like this, if you get the bottom of the transplant down into the native soil, that's probably going to help your cause a little bit because it's going to actually, start retain. Yeah, those roots are going to be able to get at that soil moisture in the soil, which just holds moisture way better than compost sitting on top. Couple more. That's Dan Perkins up in northern Indiana, just making labor easier. So I added this slide just to be cognizant, like, yeah, there is labor involved in spreading mulch. But hopefully, in the long run, through like decreased weed suppression and less watering through the year, hopefully we'll save labor in that regard as well. So he's basically getting rid of the labor to pick up the mulch because that's like the biggest part of it. And to put it in a wheelbarrow or a bucket. So he's lifting that up with the tractor and then dumping it into several buckets at a time. So then his staff can go out and apply it where needed. I think that's handy. But yeah, just seeing this is just a picture of soil under mulch. Like, yeah, seems like every time I look under mulch, like the soil looks moist and good. So, yeah, definitely a good practice for a garden. Just be cognizant also that some of the landscape pins are a little bit like harder to find in mulch, and it can be lost a little bit easier. So some farmers recommend using like a heavier duty pin or stake to stake down like landscape fabric if you are like using more mulch. This is like a hedgerow. So mulching can be used for hedgerows too. This is at a farm that was planting like a beneficial insect planting nearby. So shrubs and trees that are great for pollinators. There's probably some fruiting shrubs in there for food as well. But yeah, they're using mulch to really seal the deal on weed suppression. So this Google Sheets version is the version that I'm going to show you today. It's the most updated version of the mulching calculator. There's an older version that still works, and it's being used by like USDA NRCS planners. And eventually I will get the new updates from the Google Sheets version back into Excel too, so they mirror each other. But for the sake of this, we're going to be really looking at the Google Sheets version. And then there's a mulching PDF, which is the next document I'll show you. And I think it's just a really helpful guide that Urban Soil Health and the NRCS and I just kind of work together to put these things together. And it basically kind of goes through like what are kinds of mulches that folks use. And they did add synthetic mulch. I know I haven't talked about synthetic mulch, but landscape fabric. I just recognize that some mulches are organic, and then some mulches might be more like plastic. Um, but yeah, there's carbon and nitrogen ratios also. So scroll down a bit. Yeah, you can kind of see that graph on the left. Don't worry about reading like all of this. You can go back to it. But like in general, carbon to nitrogen ratios, like kind of like in compost, if something's brown, it's usually gonna have a higher carbon content, carbon to nitrogen ratio. And if something's like more green, like a vegetable or hairy vetch or legume cover crop or hay, those might even have a more green, lower carbon and nitrogen ratio um, than something like straw. Does this high carbon mulch on top of the soil affect what's going on in the soil? So if you were to like till in wood chips or till in straw, there's a lot of activity that needs to happen to break those down, break that carbon down by the microbes. And in doing so, the microbiology actually needs nitrogen from the soil system. And when they take that nitrogen to do what they're doing to break down the carbon, they're actually kind of stealing nitrogen away from a crop. So that's why and most people don't really recommend like tilling in wood chips, because you're going to have that nitrogen tie up. But if leaving them on the soil surface, there's not going to be as much, draw or manipulation of the nitrogen in the soil. I think there's probably a lot of research that needs to be done. And yeah, I should probably also say that like, yeah, there should need more research that needs to be done. And also like it can affect it because like if you do put like, for example, like alfalfa hay, which is more nitrogen rich because it's got legumes in it. as opposed to straw, which is more like carbon, like tall grass based. You can see a more of a nitrogen response in like a tomato that's mulched underneath alfalfa, and that's just because the alfalfa is decomposing. And where's it going to go? Eventually, it's some of it's going to get down in the soil, and eventually that plant's going to take some of that up. I should move on. We talked about temperature, like dark mulches being like able to warm the soil up a little bit more, and light mulches being a little bit more repellent to soil heating up. How much to apply? I'm not going to dwell on this too much because there is a table. I'm gonna zoom in. There's a table that kind of gives like pros and cons to each mulch. Like sometimes I apply like half an inch. Sometimes I apply just like a really like right now, for example, I was planting a just the other day I was finished with a crop and I was gonna plant a cover crop. And the soil looked bare, like just the mulch had decomposed. So I decided to put like a little bit of like a really light layer of compost on. I wasn't even sure if it's like an eighth of an inch, just like really light. And I did that because I wanted to protect the soil surface. I knew that the cover crop's going to take like 2 weeks to really germinate and protect the soil. And I'm that committed to keeping that soil covered that I just put a little bit of compost on to give the soil some protection until that cover crop could get a canopy up and actually do the soil coverage using its leaves. So lots of different ways to think about to think about like to think about depths and like how much to put on. In general, this has about 5 tabs. So the mulching tool itself, which is a tab that we can actually put in like, okay, if I put mulch down, like I'm going to record it or I'm going to plan it. And you can figure out like how much mulch you need, which we'll see. Then the cost and total tab is where you can put in cost of different kinds of mulches. So you can see how much you need, how much you're actually planning and how much it might actually cost. The helpful area calculator is just a calculator where you can quickly figure out areas based on length and width of beds. NRCS program summary. If you are getting into or if you are in a program with the USDA NRCS, something like Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, they actually have yeah, they actually pay or help pay for mulch, is one of their practices. Um, and it's a competitive program. Feel free to reach out to us or your local Soil and Water or your local NRCS or Purdue if you got questions about that. But in general, if you are in that program, this kind of does some calculations for a conservation planner to help with that contract. And then some reference tables for the mulching calculations, which is basically what's the background data for this calculator to run. And then I should say the disclaimer that, some, this is like a bale, for example, in this program, like covers a certain amount of like area. I think it's like 120 square feet for like a straw bale is what we came to. But I've also seen like those little Halloween bales that you can buy for Halloween that are like the size of your hand. Like that's not the same thing, right? And there's also like a bale that could be like, twice the size of the average bale. That's really dense and compacted, just the way they harvested it. So this one does assume that it's a kind of an average size bale. I'll show you how to change that if you absolutely need to. But in general, we just kind of had to make some assumptions. But realize that those assumptions were made. Um, okay, so I'm going to go on to the mulching tool itself. So put your name, your location. Like let's say I'm kind of messing with like years 2026 to 2028. You wouldn't have to do that. You could put like notes in if you've got if you need some extra notes. But I'll just go ahead and get to how to do this. So let's say we've got a garden. So I'm going to put like um, my garden's broken up into plots A, B, and C. So that might be like an easy way for me to do this. So I'm just going to say garden A, right? And it's like, we'll say 800 square feet. Okay. So in 2025, this year, and so before going too deep on this, you can lump and split like a lot with this, right? Like you could get it down to, hey, on this little square foot on this corner of the garden, like I'm actually going to mulch it way differently than everything else. And you could give that its own line item or its own line. Or you could say, hey, my whole garden's getting straw. I'm just going to say like, hey, this is my whole whole garden, right? And it's 2,000 square feet. Let's do that first. So So I can actually go down to the material and I can choose which material that I want to mulch with. So let's say straw. And let's say I want 2 inches of depth. Okay. Now I'm going to need to pick the estimated amount needed to be to match the kind of material. So this is kind of an extra step, but we don't have cubic feet of straw really. We don't have cubic yards of straw. We've got bales of straw. So if I put bales of straw, now it's going to tell me that for this 2,000 square feet for 2 inches, I need about 33 average bales of straw. Okay. So before going too much farther, I'm going to scroll down, and at the bottom of this sheet, it does have like a way to kind of a guide to know which how to match those, because you do need to choose the material. So if you choose compost, shredded leaves, grass clippings, wood chips, or sawdust, more of those bulk materials, you can use cubic feet, cubic yards, and loads. If you use straw or hay or alfalfa hay, then you can use bales with this calculator. If you use landscape fabric or newspaper, you can use layers. Okay. So that's kind of like yeah, maybe in the future we can fix that with programming, but like, and for now, like you do have to make both those choices. So let's say in like 2006, let's do our whole garden again. It's 2,000 square feet. And this time we're putting compost on. So like, I'll go ahead and put compost and 2 inches, or let's put 1.5 inches, for example. I can go over here to how much is needed. And let's say I want to work in cubic yards. I'll go ahead and do that. Um, yeah, so now I know that I need 9.3 cubic yards of compost to cover that whole garden at 1.5 inches as well. So in 2025, I'm doing like 2 inches, need 33 bales. In 2026, I'm doing like at 1.5 inches of compost and I need 9.3 cubic yards. Okay. Um, so one cool thing that I think about this program is that the loads, you can actually think, okay, like of this cubic yards, how many actually wheelbarrows um, might that be for me to have to actually spread that, right? So up here, there's like a load information, and this is optional on the top right. But you can basically put in like how much volume of compost or like shredded leaves are in your bucket or wheelbarrow or truck, etc. So, for example, let's say I've got you can put gallons. You could say, okay, I've got 4 gallons. I'm using a 5 gallon bucket and I'm filling it up with 4 gallons of soil of compost, right? So now I can go down here and instead of cubic yards, I can actually change that to loads and it's going to tell me I need 469 buckets, 5 gallon buckets to do that. So maybe I won't use a bucket and I'll change that to a 3 cubic foot wheelbarrow. And now I'm looking more like 83. Okay. So that's how you can kind of use that to, yeah, to instead of looking at cubic yards. You can also do that, right? You can quickly choose cubic yards. But if you really want to know how many trips it might take you, then you can use loads to your advantage there. I could see like a grower or a farm manager maybe using this even as like a sheet to give to a crew, right? To say, hey, this is going to be how many loads, or at least use it to be able to plan that. Okay, change that back to cubic yards. Okay. I'm not sure how many like NRCS planners we have on here and stuff. But I'm gonna add one little piece that's kind of like part of that. And if you guess a part of their planning process, so if you are in an NRCS contract, for example, and you have like 2,000 square feet of mulch planned for 2026, for example. But let's say in 2026, like you did this compost in the spring, and now you're actually that same year, you're doing your whole garden again. And in the fall, you're wanting to plant, let's say, garlic. So you're going to mulch it with straw, for example. And let's say we put 2 inches on and we put this many bales. Okay. So now, I guess you can ignore this if you're not like an NRCS agency person, but you can actually come over here and put contract item. So we can say, okay, this is a contract item because, and what I want to say is that the NRCS contracts, they don't pay for two, at least in Indiana, they don't pay for like two applications in 1 year. So currently this is actually like a double counting, right? Like 2000 and 2000 for 2026. So really we're just going to put contract item for one of those. And now this is the only one that's picked up in the contract. But it covers that area and counts it as comp or as mulched. So sorry for that aside. Um, okay, so let's say in 2027, like, yeah, let's say you want to do the whole garden again, right? 2,000 square feet. And we're using, let's use compost again. Let's do 1.5 inches, for example. Change that to yards. So now we can kind of start developing a plan, right? Let's say, and also in 2027, we're just doing like plot A of the garden, which is, let's say, 700 square feet. And we're going to do that in straw. And we're going to cover it with 2 inches and call that bales. So now we know that in 2027, we're doing the whole garden in compost. We could even put like whole garden spring, for example, compost. And then like in the fall, plot A of that garden is getting straw for maybe garlic. And then back to NRCS, like we're going to go ahead and count this as a yes for this 2,000 square feet. And since that this 700 square feet of the garlic is already in plot A is kind of is already included in this 2,000 square feet, we won't add that as a contract item. If you come back here to the tab that's NRCS program summary, and then you say like, okay, 2025, you start putting in your contract years, it's going to tell you like how many square feet is planned. It's basically going to pick up the data from that table and pull it in, and it's only going to pull in the ones that you clicked yes for contract item. Okay, I'll stop there. You can also go to this cost and totals tab. So now you can see all those, and this doesn't matter. This like that contract little item here. This doesn't affect your actual cost and totals. So I'm back here at cost and totals, and now I know like in 2025 I've got 33 bales of straw planned. In 2026 the same, right? And like 2026 and 27, those were my compost applications. So if I start putting like cost, let's say it's like $40 a yard or it's like $8 a bale, then I can start seeing like how much like the mulch is going to cost me per year. And it's also going to give me like totals. So this is kind of like where you get your quantities and your costs as well. Once you have like cost in here, so variable, but let's say it's, yeah, no cost for, let's say we get our wood chips for free, grass for free, leaves for free. So now when you go back to the mulching tool, now that we have those costs in there, in that cost and totals tab, like it will start picking up the estimated material cost. Again, just an estimate, but let's say I'm wanting to change this to like 5 inches of compost, right? Like now I'm looking at $1,000 instead of like 2 inches of compost. So that's kind of how you can use that to kind of look at budgets kind of in a sense and kind of just compare and think through things. Here at the bottom, there is like a default reference data. So, it's basically telling where the math comes from. So like one bale of straw covers 120 square feet with a final 1 inch depth. And final depth is 3 times less than the depth at the time of application to compensate for mulch compression over time. So that's just technical language to say like when I put 3 inches of mulch or 3 inches of straw on the bed, in like, a month, it might just be 1 inch. So it's going to divide by 3, right? So maybe an FYI, like when you say this is final depth for straw, if I put 1 inches, like technically when you put 16.7 bales out there, it's going to look like 3 to 4 inches when you first apply it. And then over time, it's gonna get down to an inch. I think like gosh, what like I mean like in my own garden, I might be able to be like, okay, let's say next next year's what 2025, right? Like I might look at my crop plan and be like, okay, plots, there's lots of way of doing it. I could be like plot like or beds A1, A2, A3, like they all need like straw, for example, because I know they're going to be like planted in garlic. Like I could start thinking about that way. Like once I got, if I didn't want to do this for every single time I wanted to like make a garden mulch plan, like maybe next year, once I get the hang of this, I might be like about 40% of my beds need straw and about 60% of my beds need compost, right? And then I could choose this one for straw and choose this one for compost, and I could just use um, these two items to get um, a general idea about how much compost and I might need and how much I might need to spend on it. So let's say that's like 400 square feet and that's like 600 square feet. If you don't know how like what your square feet of your gardens are, you can actually come to the helpful area calculator here. And this is just a way to kind of figure out area quickly. So this doesn't feed into anything. It doesn't really do any like, yeah, material calculations. It's just like um, my bed, like a typical bed for my garden is, let's say I've got 15 of them and they're each 2.5 foot wide and they're about 25 feet long. Okay. So like each of my beds is about 940 square feet. Or no, sorry, the total for all those beds is 940 square feet. Each bed is actually 62 square feet. So, if I was using that mulching tool to actually like figure out each bed, I would use that 62 as my square foot. And if I was looking at the whole garden at once, all the growing areas, then I would use the top number. Let's say you wanted to so think about your walkways separately. So let's say I've got like 16 walkways and they are um, about 1.5 feet wide by 25 feet. So now I've got 600 feet of walkway that I need to mulch or that I'd like to mulch. So I'm going to go back here and I could say, okay, in 2026, or actually, let's not wait, let's do it next year. I could do like my walkways. And I said those are 600 square feet. So I'll go 600 square feet. And we're gonna actually use, my daughter doesn't let me use wood chips because they think they get in her shoes. Some people do. I use straw sometimes or dead cover crops. Lots of options, but let's use wood chips here. Let's say 3 inches. And then I'm going to put cubic yards. And now I know I need about 5.6 cubic yards of wood chip. That last tab here is called a reference table. I put like a little disclaimer, like try not to mess with this, but if you need to, like do it. But this is where you could say like, hey, my straw bale is actually, it actually doesn't like actually one bale will cover 1 inch like at 200 feet because I'm using this like huge, big dead straw bale, right? So you could actually bump that up to 200 square feet. And so now one bale is covering farther. Or if you like go out in the field and you actually like, like use this, like you actually put down a bale and or like one bale covers this much square feet, then you could change that to make it work for you better. But in general, we just kind of tried to do our best professional judgment, get some other input too, and kind of come to a general consensus on average like size of a normal bale. Appreciate y'all being here.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. If anybody has any last minute questions, there's still a couple minutes left in the hour. Feel free to type them in or unmute. Otherwise, we'll be sending out another invitation um, soon-ish to learn about like the nutrient organic amendment calculator tool. So that'll be coming soon this fall.
Cool. I think Halloween, Becca. I think we can target Halloween.
Halloween. Yeah.
All right, cool.